meetings. Our very own George Wiafe is there with them. We'll be hearing from George in just a moment. He joins us via Zoom. Hi, George, if you can hear me. Good morning.
I can hear you. Good morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for making the time to wake up this early to give us a quick update. In fact, maybe we'll start with that before we get into our conversations, which are all on related matters, Ghana, the IMF, constant bailouts, and, the recolonization that is being suggested by Kwame Pienim. But before we get into that, George, you're there to attend these meetings. Tell us what you're picking up about the direction and what we can expect from these spring meetings.
I think that, Kojo, for a lot more people in Ghana, the most important thing for them is about Ghana's program and whether indeed we are making progress or not. Now, depending on who you engage in terms of persons that are close to the IMF, the development partners, the G20, the Paris Club, those who are working closely with these institutions, it appears that they are doing everything in their power to ensure that Ghana gets its program approved by the board. Well, talking about timelines, it's quite debatable and maybe we'll not be getting seriously into that. But it appears that these development partners, from the US government through Janet Yellen, who she made a speech at a program here in Washington saying that she's going to engage all the creditors to fast-track discussions on negotiations on Ghana's program as well as Zambia. So if you engage all these partners, Kojo, it appears that they are quite committed. They are quite pushing everything to ensure that we get a program to stabilize the economy. That is on the side of the partners. As to whether government also appreciate the current challenge at hand and they're also fast-tracking the process, well, it's also open for discussion. Engaging some government officials as well, they are quite optimistic that they've done what they are supposed to do on their part in terms of meeting all the necessary preconditions so that a board date can be set to look at Ghana's program. Now, before they can go to the board, remember the one critical thing that is supposed to be determined is whether the bilateral creditors agree to a restructuring of Ghana's program or participating in restructuring of Ghana's program, or what we call the participating in Ghana's financing program, which could do as two things. You're going to participate in Ghana's financing program by one, committing fresh funding, or end up cancelling Ghana's debt, and Ghana is then expected to use those funds to help restructure the economy. So two things, it's all about Ghana's program. Again, on the bigger discussion, how can the fund and the World Bank work to stabilize the global economy as talks grow of growing recession hitting those bigger economies? So could you, for a Ghanaian, I might be interested in what happens to Ghana's program. For someone coming from another country, it's about how do we minimize the shocks of the global economic recession and the banking system and its impact on their respective economies.
But George, I mean, you are there and you've been picking up information. From what you gather, the Paris Club and China, what is their level of commitment? Is there some certainty around, they participating in our finance program?
Westing, and that is very critical. Signaling a commitment to participate might not necessarily mean that they're going to cancel our debt. Again, from off-record engagement, from the Paris Club angle, Westing, they appear to be committed to participating in our financing program. And a meeting is supposed to be taking place, that is today. And after that meeting, they are going to issue a release signaling their commitment. That should be dependent on all the countries agreeing to. But again, what we are picking up from this meeting, or those who are close to the Paris Club, indicated that they are going to signal their commitment in participating in Ghana's financing program. That is just first step to kickstarting negotiations on whether they should cancel our debts or they should look at restructuring our debt. interestingly, we're also picking up is that China, in principle, and let me use my word carefully, in principle, is also committed to participating in Ghana's financing program. So that is
in
what I
what
can
way?
say.
Participating in what way? Are they going to forgive the debt, or
When you maybe it's more of a technical jargon. When you agree to participating or financing in Ghana's program, it's two things. That would then ultimately lead to Ghana's debt being cancelled, or you agree to committing fresh funding to the program. If you engage some of these countries, just a quick engagement I've done, they are more leaning to more of the debt cancellation finally, but that will be dependent on certain strict conditions being met. Now, if I'm cancel your debt, what are you going to use the money for? Are you going to use that money to pay another country, or you're going to invest that money into the economy, into programs that would aim at reducing poverty and also aim at fast tracking the recovery of the economy? So those are critical things that these countries are looking for. Don't forget that what the IMF board is asking for, the staff is asking for, is that initially just secure commitment from these countries that they are committed to participating in the program. So that is what the board is looking for. Whilst you go ahead and still negotiate with these countries or blocks that they will look at possible cancellation of your debts or restructuring those debts that could lengthen the payment period and all the rest. So for China, in principle, from what I've picked up, they are committed to participating in Ghana's financing program. That could, and choosing my words carefully, lead to possible debt cancellation or restructuring our debts that could lengthen the period for payment and also varying the interest and payment terms as well, Pujo.
So, George, if I get you clearly, now, what could happen is that once they express their commitment, then we could, our staff level agreement could be presented to the board even before a conclusion of whether it's going to be a debt restructuring or a debt cancellation, right?
You're right, Winston. And it's a long process, but again, what you also get is that it appears that some actors are committed to fast tracking the process. Now, when Ghana is done with all these preliminary investigations, they are not going straight to the board. They are supposed to submit their economic program to the staff, IMF staff, the African department. The letter of intent also to the African department is supposed to go through several departments, legal and all the rest. Then when they are all convinced by these documents that you submitted to them, including these commitment from these partners, bilaterals, your economic program, legal terms, what are you going to do and all the rest, then they look at getting a slot for you, for the board to consider. Now, if you look at what is going on in terms of all the actors, even the IMF managing director, she's appealing directly to these creditors that don't delay in reaching a deal with Ghana and Zambia, because the more you delay, the more you hurt these economies. Now, if, let's say, let me use my words carefully, if a referee, if a judge goes out to make appeal to the plaintiff that, listen, can you look at settling this case out of court and all the rest, then it gives you the signal that, listen, if the IMF staff is convinced about the economic program that Ghana will submit as well as the letter of intent, it might mean that it might not be long for the board to sit on our program and approve it for us to have a full economic program taken off and the first disbursement coming in.
And based on your understanding and based on all your discussions, all things being equal, when are we looking at?
It's $1 billion question. In one breath, things has to be fast tracked. In another breath, listen, you also want to be careful to ensure that nothing crops up in the middle for people to say, oh, look, you were fast tracking everything. Now look what has happened with X splash on your face. So all other things being equal, holding all these things constant, listen, there's a revenue measure that has been passed. There are still reports that there are still moves to look at how that could be frozen and all the rest. If everything remains constant and things are progressing as they expect, the hope is that possibly from the middle of May or maybe end of May, Ghana could get the board looking at this program for approval. And don't forget that before the program goes to the board, all the necessary work has been done, that sometimes it is hard, and I'm choosing my words carefully, for the board to reject the country's program. And as I said, with all these actors, you have the U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen just at a meeting last week with the Treasury issuing a statement that she is personally going to push the creditors to reach a deal with Ghana and Zambia. It tells you where we are heading to. So, well, unless a certain black cat passes through, or government itself doesn't show that much commitment in taking those tough measures to stabilize the economy, then as I said, all other things being possible and holding all these factors constant, maybe we should look at somewhere in May to have a program, or it could be earlier, Winston, but just being very careful on these dates.
George, thank you so much for this update. Obviously, we're going to be touching base with you more and more as events unfold. Thank you so much. And that is George Wiafe from the Joy Business Desk. Ray.
The understanding that we've had over the period is that this country would need an IMF program, would have to survive on this IMF program, and the earlier we get it, the better for all of us. This is because as we speak today, we are still being shut out completely by the people we used to borrow big money from, the Eurobond market, right? So basically every year we go 3 billion, 2 billion, sometimes 1 billion. And sometimes we celebrate how huge the amount we are getting from these people. But what we forgot was that we were going to pay back along the line. And certainly we are going to pay. So we did that accumulation for a very long time. Wasted, you're talking about Malaysia. Let's use another example of a country that went through IMF engagements and went through domestic debt exchange and came to where it is today, Jamaica. In fact, people have actually said that Jamaica is the typical example for most of us to learn from, all the poster child for domestic debt exchanges and all of that. What happened in Jamaica? Before the domestic debt exchange happened, industry sat with government. They agreed on the terms of going forward. Listen, it was not only the IMF that was relevant in that conversation. The people who make up the economy, who will be asked to pay money, they were also on the table. They had a never again conversation that was a bit more serious. It included making laws, establishing policies, agreeing on timelines on delivery, that politicians alone are no longer the biggest stakeholders in the country. So we all need to be on board. At the end of the day, all the parties in the state, more importantly, businesses, industry, and all the other people ordinarily who would not have been running the country, had a say. Is it the same we had in this country up to this point that we are speaking on this program? Today, we know various pointers from the staff level agreement. I have not seen the entirety of that staff level agreement. 2, even our post-economic recovery program, which was supposed to lead us out of our current problems and take us into the future, we don't know the full content of that. Today, the program that the government of the Republic of Ghana is putting before the IMF, which is really our program that's put before the IMF, as I sit here, I have no idea what the content is. Perhaps the people in government will know. But how do you get a buy-in? How do you get people to believe that we will never come to this point again, and that we will be responsible going forward, so that we will not need a caretaker to take care of us? You appoint a caretaker or get a nanny for your child because the child is incapable of doing certain things, and that you want the child to be watched consistently. Are we incapable of doing our own things? Are we incapable of managing an economy? Let's be fair, this is not a very big economy, right? It's an economy for some, at most 31 million people. It's not an economy that's been quite productive. A single bank in the US, one day, the people that withdrew money from the bank before it collapsed, the SVB, that amount of money was bigger than our budget. But that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that even with the small that we have not been good at managing it. That conversation is not being had in this country. It's because for some reason we have all been hoodwinked
into thinking that we didn't put this on ourselves, and that we just happen to have had an unfortunate incident happening in this country from external impact. Consistently, if we believe that narrative, we lose sight of the opportunity to scale back, sit down, and devise a way forward that is inclusive, that has everybody on the table, that talks about how we ought to be on our own. And I'm hearing nothing substantive in that area. Once again, we will have those usual small conversations. We will do small importation. We will do this thing. But where is the comprehensive program to take us out of this particular situation? Nobody is discussing that way. That maybe the expression that so we are waiting to maybe get out of the current state. But as part of getting out of the current state is a thinking that's required, because Kojo, misfortune sometimes gives countries the opportunity to take very tough decisions. So parties can claim, this government can say that, listen, I'm not doing it because I hate your people. I'm actually making the new standard in Ghana. The number of ministers are under 50. The accountability structures are going to work 100% going forward. Those are the things that misfortune can bring to you, because you take advantage of that, so that nobody blames you personally for if you don't want to be seen as a bad guy. But we are not doing those things. We are increasingly not having that conversation. If Jamaica could have its business people sit with government and say, listen, you guys are no longer going to be alone. We want to exact commitment from you on this and that. We are not having that conversation here. Every day we are called upon to sacrifice. Sacrifice because we are being made to believe something extraordinary happened to us, and that our incompetence plays no role in that. When we continue with that narrative, we are missing an opportunity. And the more we discuss it, and the people who are supposed to spearhead the conversation are still seated somewhere, laughing sometimes, talking about irrelevant matters, it becomes difficult for us to fix it, so that we don't go back in 5 years' time. That is my worry.
Kojo, we'll come back and talk about what Kwame Pianim has said and everything. But the essence of literature is that you are able to refer, and sometimes use that as part of your learning process. So I decided to go for an article written by Barclay and Fitzgerald. It's a very old one, in 2004. An assessment of Malaysia's response to the IMF during the Asian economic crisis. So, look, I just would do one or two things. He says 4 principles were relevant to Malaysia's, dealing with the issue. First of all, the appropriateness of IMF's policies for Malaysia. 2, the enhancement of sovereignty and democracy, the promotion of self-determination, and the avoidance of moral hazard. Okay, let me now move to a very important aspect of this article, one that should influence all of us are thinking. Okay, now that part asks the simple question whether Malaysia's policies were in fact the right policies. And the article says Malaysia's initial response to the crisis was referred to by many as an IMF package without the IMF. Kojo?
Homegrown policies.
Listen to this carefully. It was referred to by many as an IMF package without the IMF. What does that mean? And I'm sure you may have heard this before, because we all know what you're going to go to the IMF with. Okay? From the period of the homegrown policies and policy credibility, we know what you're running to the IMF with. Okay. Now listen to this. At the time, in consultation with the IMF, now this is what their finance minister, Anwar Ibrahim, you may have heard the name, subsequently did. He tightened fiscal policy and made sharp spending cuts. Sharp spending cuts. What are the spending cuts today in the economy of Ghana? What are the spending cuts? Today, if I ask you, how much have we cut by way of expenditure? That would give confidence to whoever is coming to do business in this country that we're serious in, changing the fortunes of our economy. Would you be able to tell me?
No.
Yes. So that's the first thing. Look, we all know, yes, we need to increase revenue, but we also need to, at this point in time, cut our expenditure. Unfortunately, in our part of the world, one of the things we said was, okay, we're going to just reduce fuel price. I mean, coupons to ministers and do all of these things. We're cutting expenditure by 30%. How much was that? How much did we save? Of course, you're going to cut. You're not going to cut non-discretionary expenditure. You're going to cut discretionary expenditure. That in itself became a problem for us. There are more of the policies, but let's go for a break and come back.
We'll go in a minute. I just want to hear from Mamavi.
Yeah, some of us don't understand the numbers, like Ray and Winston. I was just hoping that George would say something.
Removed me from it. Me too, I don't understand it.
Something firmly on the dates, because one of the newspapers, the Economy Times, reported today that SETEC, the former finance minister, says we're going to get that boardroom approval by the end of May. And we still can't say for sure that this is going to happen at the end of May. I wonder the implications of that. The more we drag this, what does it mean? What does it mean?
The more you drag it, the worse it becomes for your economy. Because your economy today is dependent on IMF. Your credibility is dependent on getting an IMF program.
Not prayers.
No.
Not God, actually. IMF 100%.
But before we go for the break, because when we come back, but you see, before we go for the break, now, this is something that
Savior
Malaysia also did. Their restructure phase involved the merger of financial institutions and the development of the local bond market. We have a problem currently following the restructuring. But how about the development of our capital markets?
Yeah.
Today, in this country.
I thought we did 30 years ago.
Where?
We started rebuilding that system.
Hold on. Today, in this country, do you take pension funds and hand them over to government to engage in recurrent expenditure? Is that how you run an economy? Today, do we go and borrow in dollars, bring it into this country, and talk about reconstructing the motorway, when we could have actually used funds in this country to reconstruct the motorway, okay, and decide to toll it? If you like, go and use the motorway. If you like, don't use it. But if you want to use the motorway, this is how much you're supposed to pay. If we do a 10 lane and we ease traffic today, could we have decided, for instance, that a lot of the capital expenditure we should be repaying would be constructed using funds generated locally, pension funds? Let it be on record that some of the oil companies that come into this country, they use pension funds. Yes, they use pension funds.
People are investing.
The pension funds are investing in these countries. They're coming into a part of the world and investing, and they get high returns. Sometimes you make losses. That's the nature of business. But a lot of the time also, your profits far exceed your losses. So, let's go and come. There's more to be said.
Look, because when we come back, we'll be dealing with a different aspect of this conversation. I just want to put this out there quickly before we take this break. Look, everything right now, in terms of our future, our destiny, that one is in the hands of the IMF now. They will give us a program. They will. I mean, it's in their interest to do so, almost as much as it's in our interest to go to them. So they will give us a program as long as we are able to, tick the boxes. But right now, the only variable, because IMF will take over, right? The only variable now is how our government behaves between now and the start of the IMF program. That's the only variable. We have to ask ourselves, are we observing a government that is capable of managing this nation after an IMF program or not? All the things that we have hinted, suggested, we've heard experts talk about, all the clear, low-hanging fruits of cutting expenditure which have not been done. If by the time we go into an IMF program, they are not done, and then the IMF comes and forces us to do it, does that not tell you directly something about the people who are leading you? And should we really wait? Should we wait until an election before we tell them that they are messing it up? In fact, should we let them tell? You realize it's become a debate. When people tell government you are messing up, government responds like we are not messing up, we're doing the right thing, we manage the economy well, we've made the right choices. If it was the other people, it would have been worse. Why are we even allowing them to express an opinion on what they've done for us? Is it up to them to mark their own work? Why do we even allow them to tell us how well they have done when we are the ones who are either benefiting or losing from the decisions they make? let's remove them from the discussion about whether they've done well or not. And let's tell them what we need them to do. Because they will not do it on their own.
We've got some messages on WhatsApp.
Sure.
So this one says, okay, so this is from Mocho from Accra. Says our leaders have mismanaged our finances, and that is why we are where we are. Another one says all our leaders are competent. The challenge we have is that they are all greedy. That is our pain, and that's from Kwekwe Latabi Okoshi. Mike says this is not incompetence, rather it's pure greed, selfishness, and corrupt practices that has brought us here. And the final one from Ray in Toronto. Ray says it's not only incompetence but also greediness that has plunged our beloved Ghana into such a mess. Lord be with you all, guys, he says. Thanks, Ray.
And also with you, Ray. All right. Okay. Let's get started. First of all, in case you missed it, this is what Kwame Pianim said on Newsfile.
Extraordinary time. We walked into these times with our eyes open. Did we have floods? Have we have hurricanes in Ghana? Did we have Ebola? What did we have? We had a Minister for Finance who borrowed and Parliament that supported him to borrow. We are 66 years old as an independent country. We have now somebody from the U.S. Treasury sitting in the Ministry of Finance to hold Kemeforia's hands. Ken told me once, we went to school with these same white boys. We are just as good as them. Now you have somebody sitting there holding his hand, giving him tutorials in what? And we have somebody being paid by a Swiss franc sitting in Bank of Ghana. Our governor was out giving advice to other countries. We should be ashamed of ourselves, 66 years old. And we are being recolonized. Why can't the Americans help us by appointing a governor general to come and govern for us? And appoint 5 lawyers so that we can send them the 375 parliamentarians. And those 5 lawyers will make our bills for us. Look, we are matured enough. We should not run to daddy and say, there is no Father Christmas. Let us make haste slowly, as the Romans used to say. Let's sit down now and say, how do we cut our coat according to our cloth? So every 4 years, we don't run to the IMF. Projects. Why projects? Every project in Ghana costs double the price. Why? Because of incompetence and corruption. The German ambassador was telling us, show us we are going to help you, but show us that you are doing something. Cut some expenditures. Have we cut any? We have more ministers than the US, UK, Germany. Where is Father Christmas? As far as I'm concerned, nobody should give us any debt forgiveness. They should structure it, we should pay. So next time somebody is borrowing like there's no tomorrow, we'll tell them, stop borrowing because you have to pay.
Yep, he said it. Ray.
Can you disagree with this? I mean, listen, of course, the exasperation is the voice is known. And Mr. Penima has lived long in this country, very long enough, to know what's right and what's wrong. I am sure he's disappointed like many people because we are not making any progress. We are going in circles every 5, at most 10 years. So we'll make some progress within 5-6 years, then they become the shining star of Africa. Then they talk about us all over the place. Then we would actually walk into the problems again. But he said something, he said this time around with our eyes wide open. Basically saying that we should stop dismissing, we should stop parroting those claims that, oh, some misfortune happened to us in a way that took us off our game. We were in the known of this. I remember in 2019, you remember Winston, Professors Lord Mensah, Professors Godfred Bokpin kept on reminding everybody in this country, listen, you are borrowing too much, scale down. And let's not forget 2019 was the year we had just completed the IMF program. We were being told consistently, but we are celebrating it, right? Government actually did parties to celebrate having to successfully borrow again, borrow huge amounts of monies. Then there's the issue about accounting for how much you have borrowed. It became a very, confused conversation. They say, well, where are the projects? Oh, but can't you see we are doing them? We are spreading them thin across the country. But this is too expensive. The people just say, okay, well, we are still doing something in this country. Then it culminates into the period where the real shocks happen to all of us. Then when we say we are built buffers, apparently all the conversations about sinking funds and all of those things were nothing at all. There were no buffers. If there were buffers, this conversation we are having today will not be happening. If there were buffers, we will not be. See, this country woke up one morning, and because we're cut off from having to borrow 1 billion, 2 billion from the Eurobond market, everything starts cascading. You think about it. Without 1 billion, 2 billion, starting with the beginning of the year, our currency was running wild and everything. 1 billion, $2 billion. That was enough to take us down the hill. It should tell you that we have not built the buffers that we've been talking about strongly all the time. But can you blame us? Then we now are in a condition where we cannot pay our debt. First, when the suggestion that we will be defaulted ever came up on the table, it was almost like you were doing mongering. You remember? They said, no, you can never talk about that. Why do you think we'll ever get to this stage? But we've now moved beyond getting to the stage. Now we openly are begging. First, we discuss not a debt default. We say, oh no, it's a nice change. So don't worry, it's not really a problem. We are just trying to manage the situation. But now we openly are begging, not only for putting up a restructure, but also forgive us our debt. This is back to 2001. Let's not get it wrong. So for a country that after 23 or 22 years, you go back to 2001, almost starting John Kufuor's period again. Are you not irresponsible? So everything
we went through has come to nothing.
Yeah. I mean, 20 good years. Imagine your life. We wipe up 20 years of it. You are back to the stage where you are basically begging to be forgiven your debt. And we prided ourselves for being middle income lower country. Then we moved to the extent, and I mean, listen, I've said it ad nauseum about how current managers, finance minister says we are a proud nation, why people cannot dictate to us, we can manage our systems and all of that. But all of these things came to the same conversation, that today the same white people are the ones we are begging to beg other people for us. We are begging them even on the international stage. Sometimes we even offer security information so that they can beg for us. Sometimes we actually are bending over backwards. Whichever position we find, we can't speak our minds to them because we need them to beg for us. If we are not collectively ashamed of our position, then we are people who have no shame at all. But we elected people to avoid this situation. This bus was not without a driver. We put people directly in charge to avoid the current situation we find ourselves in. The other difficulty, I mean, he says we should appoint 5 people because, see, let's be fair, and sometimes we only reduce it to the people who are in the ministries and see. We appointed a group to also check, oversight, check these people when they are borrowing. Parliament of the Republic of Ghana. Every major debt situation, they had one way or the other how to approve it. We were excited when we are approving these things. When we complain about you're borrowing too much, so but we needed to do the things you have to do so that we can move forward. How are you going to pay for these things? So, but we always pay. But we had representatives in Parliament whose responsibility was to say, hey, hold on, we can't do this. For whichever reason, they became pliant accomplices and decided to make sure that we are in this situation that we find ourselves in. So what business did we have in place? So that's why when Mr. Mpianu says, listen, clear your parliament, put there 5 people, 5 good lawyers from the US, they will do your laws for you. Let's move on with our lives. No ex gratia to them. That representation was not happening. Because I'm not sure Ghanaians really asked them to go borrow the way they are borrowing.
Raymond, we'll go on to the line and speak to Professor Bokpin. But you know, when the president went into parliament during the State of the Nation address, he talked about how a lot of the money that we borrowed as a country went into the construction of roads. You remember?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You remember?
Yes.
I am holding the 2019 budget. And in fact, I have been looking at every year's budget since the MPP took office. So 2019, I'm looking at the total expenditure allocation to the various ministries, infrastructure, roads, and highways. And guess what? it is 1.2 billion. In 2017, 1.3 billion. 2019, about 1.2 billion. In total, we've not spent more than 10 billion on road construction. We have we
have borrowed how much?
Look, and let all of us go and I just used the allocations to the ministry. Let's look at it. You can do same right now. Everybody listening to me can just do same. Look at the allocations to the roads and highways ministry over the period. Compare that to the Office of Government Machinery. Come back and let's have this conversation. You begin to ask yourself, where did the money go? This is just one thing that I wanted to put out there. We'll come back and talk more about it. But let's get to Professor Bokpin. He has some thoughts on Ghana being recolonized, as Kwame Pienim suggests.
Prof, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Yes, good morning. And good morning to our cherished listeners.
Well, we're a sovereign nation. We're just having some small problem. So we say IMF should come and help us. How does that amount to recolonization, as Kwame Pienim says?
Well, thank you very much for your question. That has been on the table for a while now. And actually, it's not only Ghana. There's a new Scrabble for Africa. Every other powerful country wants a portion of Africa. That is what is at play right now. It's not so much about China. It's not so much about this. Look, the conclusion of all of this is that there is practically no country in the global north that made it without using Africa as a stepping stone. Practically no country. You can examine the development literature and you will see how Africa was used, planned in their developmental agenda. It was not so difficult for China to have observed this when 2 decades ago it was pointed out that China was trying to recolonize Africa, or was trying to colonize Africa through trade and debt diplomacy. Keep that in mind. Through trade and debt diplomacy. Now, there is a strong perception now that the West wants their former girlfriend back, which is also playing out in all this debt restructuring discussion. You would have heard powerful people from the World Bank and the others trying to paint China as a bad lender on the African continent. It's for a good reason. What is it for? Whoever lends you money has colonized you. Bible says, just as a slave is a servant to the master, so is a borrower a servant to the lender. What the West is trying to do right now is to try and free up Africa from China and Russia through insistence on debt forgiveness, which historically really hasn't been part of the philosophy of China, Japan, and the others. Keep that in mind, that when Ghana signed up for HIPIC in early 2000, Japan responded in a negative way. Keep that in mind, that it is not really part of their policy to forgive. It's not so different from China. Why is that so now? Because China is using debt and trade diplomacy to win the heart of Africa. Simply because 2.5 decades ago, when Africa needed the West the more, they were organizing sending off parties for themselves. And China stepped in breaching the huge infrastructure deficit. Their footprint today is so obvious. Not so much in Ghana, but you can see it in other African countries, including Zambia and the others, right? So the issue is, if the West wants Africa back, then there has to be a conscious strategy to free up Africa from its debt bondage to China and the others. Don't forget, a couple of weeks or months ago, Russia had indicated that they had almost $60 billion on the table for Africa. Don't forget that not long ago, U.S. assembled African leaders as district chief executives and told them what they want to do for us. Don't forget, not long ago, China, Germany, France, and the rest of them. It is quite obvious. Look, go back to the history and see how the IMF and the World Bank in the 70s and 80s kept advising African countries to ramp up volume production in primary commodities when world price was actually low, and they balanced the difference through borrowing. That is why the Jubilee campaign in the late 90s, which now has metamorphosed into debt justice, was asking for debt forgiveness, because this is what the IMF and the World Bank also facilitated. So it is only Africa that actually doesn't know what is happening around itself. There is so much at stake in the new scramble for Africa. Don't forget the global geopolitics. We have now moved beyond just politics. We are talking about the geoeconomic politics, fragmentation, and how the BRICS are strengthening their bloc and trying to win new members, particularly from Africa, and how US, UK, especially France, that feels that the Francophone that has made France what it is today, all this while, may be thinking of courting a new partner in the form of Russia. You can understand it when our president openly gossiped about what is happening in Burkina Faso with respect to Russia and all of that. So there's a lot happening at the global level, which is playing out in the new partition and scramble for Africa. The powerful nations understand it very well, that without Africa, they can't make it and they can't sustain it. Precisely so. And why are we saying this at this time? You can see the new form of colonization in terms of cultural values, right? And invasion, social imperialism, manifesting in the form of LGBTQ. We've seen how Russia has rebuffed that. China, Saudi Arabia, the Arab countries, that the West can't take those kind of things, lifestyle, abominable, destructive, backwardness to those countries. But they are okay to come to Ghana, some way, somehow, maneuver their way through, because we don't know exactly what we want. We have not demonstrated that we are incapable of incompetence, simply because corruption, greed overshadows our intelligence and God-given brain. We have traded that off for greed, and the average Ghanaian today is poorer and poorer and poorer. This is what is happening.
Now, when you listen to Kwame Pianim, in fact, he's driving for a different approach. He says, look, let's not pursue this forgiveness of debt. Let's go for some restructuring of our debt. Let's handle our responsibilities, pay what we owe, so that next time we'll learn sense. I'm just wondering, in practical terms, we're halfway up the tunnel, to the IMF. Is it even a realistic option at this point to say that, we don't want the IMF to come and impose conditionalities on us, so we're going to manage our own affairs, we're going to speak to those we owe money to, restructure our debt, and then take the tough decisions by ourselves to fix our economy and pay our bills? Is that even an option for us at this point?
Oh, it is an option.
The same people that you say have demonstrated that they cannot be, they cannot not be incompetent. These same people, you say they can do this?
Look, you know what? If we want to do it, we can do it. The average Ghanaian is not a dwarf in the intelligence continuum. We are not. We sat in the same classroom. In fact, we did better than some of them. Let me tell you something. IMF doesn't understand our economy much more than we do ourselves.
But they manage it better.
Look, they will consult us. They will take the input from here. They will repackage it and give it back to us. The 16th IMF program, we made application on the 6th of August 2014. The program kicked in on April 3rd, 2015. If you see the character of that IMF program, the inspiration it drew from the homegrown fiscal consolidation emanating from the Senti consensus, you can see that in there. We have Ghanaians at the very top of their careers across the globe. I said that it is greed which has made it look like God did not give us brain. It is greed and corruption. So, and we have said before that instead of running around all over the place begging, this is a time to call Ghanaians in a national stakeholder conversation. And then we all come to the table and see what trade-offs we have to make and what monetary mechanism we have to put in place. The average politician, and it's not only this government, since 1992, they are more interested in building the sustainability of their political structures and aspirations more than building this country. But we have allowed it because politicians also respond to incentive. So we have allowed it, and that is why they get away with it. For instance, talk about China. How much do we owe China? You can generate policy credibility either from your own homegrown policies that people will have confidence in it. When we talk about Malaysia, we talk about Singapore, we talk about South Korea, you check how many times have they been to the IMF. And the last time they were at the IMF. And check how many times Ghana has been to the IMF. With some level of support from the IMF, yes, we all need it. You need to manage the trade-off of what support you need from external, what level of cooperation you need, and then what you need to do. Because the best helping hand Ghana can find is at the end of our own arm. It can never and will never come from the West. No. Tell me which country has the IMF transformed. I am not against the IMF. I am not against the World Bank. But what I'm saying is that there is the need for us to also see what we have to do to complement whatever assistance we get from outside. Other than that, this in itself plays exactly into that marking scheme to the extent that we look that vulnerable and begging. Yes, why not?
I suppose the question I'm asking is about the practicality of it, because it sounds like you're saying ideologically we can, but practically the same leadership that you've described as corrupt and incompetent, the same leadership that to this point has not even been able to register any significant cuts in expenditure while we are aspiring to an IMF program.
Yes.
This same leadership, you are saying that at this point they can somehow find the scruples to make these tough decisions at this stage in the game. How will they do it?
Yes, it's not contradictory. We have not gotten to the point where we will give up. No. We have to keep hope alive and to the extent that, and because the one I say it can be done. Let me give you an example. The domestic debt exchange, when later government included pensions, TUC and the others rose up strongly. What did they do? They bowed to that. We should be able to sustain it and demand certain actions. Just in France, the president took a decision to increase the retirement age to 62 or so, and people were on the street. The development the West they have today, Germany, UK, France, people demanded it. It was not given. It was demanded. They asked for it. They insisted, and they got it. What are we asking for? What are we insisting? What level of sacrifice and persistence are we willing to go so that politicians will respond? Don't forget that politicians are not that powerful. is because the citizens are just weak in demanding, in insisting. And that is why all these things happen. I'm not asking for a coup or whatever, but what I'm saying is that we have a role to play. The citizens have a role to play. We have allowed it. And that is why they can say anything, get away with it, because they know that the average Ghanaian, yes, it's just a matter of time and the discussion will move on. Those countries we look up to, what they have today, they fought for it. Labor fought for 5 working days in a week. They fought, people died for it. What we call May Day in remembrance. Let's check the history. People fought for it. It was not given. We have to ask for it. We have to insist.
So, Prof, it sounds to me like what you're saying is that our leaders on their own will not do it, but
No,
we,
they
the
won't do it.
people, can force them to do it. So, in
We
essence,
can.
at this point, you're saying that we need to hit the streets.
Well, in whatever form that we think we have to, let's think through it. And let's trade off political, tribal, ethnicity, and all those things. And let's look at the common good. Okay? It doesn't have to be the case that, okay, my tribe person is not in power, or this party is this. No. No. What I'm saying is that what other countries have, and we envy them, they fought for it, they demanded it, they insisted.
So, Prof,
What are we insisting for? When government started the domestic debt exchange, even look at the division. We were long calling for an organized front from the domestic creditors. Let's form a domestic creditor committee to negotiate from position of strength. It happened in the case of Jamaica. I think Raymond mentioned it.
yes.
Okay, we were going and negotiating one by one and looking out for our interests, and the politicians got away with it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against politicians, but what I'm saying is that the kind of incentive mechanism we put in place also determines how leaders react.
Okay. Prof,
Okay, so if we allow, look, how can this country, how can this government, look, justify the size of government in the face of all that is happening? You can't. We are not even ashamed. You know, when Honorable Ken Oforiatta said that we are a proud nation, and the rest of them, look, something in me moved. What was it? I felt that, yes, without a minimum level of pride, as a country, we can't go anywhere. But we needed to back those statements by doing the necessary things. Because this IMF package, when it is approved, it will be available. You will see that some of the things we've been talking about all this while, they will find themselves in the program. They will be there. Fiscal consolidation and all of that, underpinned by structural reforms, they will be there. We have been talking about monetizing the deficit. They will do something about it. We've been talking about low revenue generation. Something will be done about it. Look at the Royal Senchi, that beautiful document, the homegrown fiscal consolidation. The beautiful things that were expressed in there. Do we have the willingness to follow, implement? No. Can the Auditor General, can Ghana Revenue Authority tell us whether, even in the opposition, those who are filing and paying 500 million Ghana cedis, and the wealth displayed by certain government officials, whether they have filed their tax returns appropriately? Have they justified their level of wealth? With their salaries over the years, would they have been able to save and be able to meet those filing fees across MPs, lifestyle audit? Somebody is paying for all of this. A political party today will be able to organize a congress and record budget surplus, but Ghana cannot hold a program without begging for people to support us. Parties and party structures are more oiled and well-resourced than the country that we call Ghana. It's because over the years, this is what we have sought to build. And you can understand why the president doesn't want to do anything about his team. It's about political structures, patronage, loyalty. Is reviewed, rewarded higher than loyalty to states, loyalty to the country. So, in fact, it's laughable. And if you engage the West, okay, on one bed they want to help up, on another bed they are telling you that you guys, you are just working according to the scheme, that you guys are incapable of governing.
So, Prof, let me ask you this. If things continue as they are, nothing changes, all things remain equal, nobody hits the streets or finds any other way of pressuring government to do anything different, we proceed into an IMF program with debt forgiveness and all of that business. Tell me what the future of Ghana looks like. Are we just another colony?
We are. Where is your independence? When you have an advisor at Bank of Ghana, oh, come on, and also at the Ministry of Finance, don't forget, in economic governance, there are two institutions that are critical for capture. The Central Bank for monetary policy, Ministry of Finance for fiscal policy. These are the two main. Where is your independence? Tell me. Where is your pride? Where is Ghana's pride? Is that what our forefathers fought for? You mean we just don't know what to do, what to say about debt management, about economic governance, with all that we have read? Come on, not at all. Let's look at what is playing out. Now, we can get a debt relief. Let's even say they grant it. It's just a matter of time. Please bear in mind that Ghana's situation today is much more precarious than a couple of decades ago. We are talking about IMF program that we are even struggling to get. Something we have gotten for 16 times in 66 years of our independence. We've gotten it 16 times. Why is it so hard now? It's so hard now because Ghana's situation is such that IMF, we need more than IMF funding. That is what is playing out. Look, let's put it this way. There is a certain guy who has seen a certain lady and says that I will marry you. And the lady says that is fine. Come and see my parents and ask for the marriage and all of that. So your supposed father-in-law looked at your payslip, looked at your expenditure, and said that, you know what, you love my daughter, there's nothing wrong with that. And I can see. But you know what, given your salary and your expenditure, you cannot take care of my daughter. But I still want to give you my daughter in marriage. This is the only condition. Can you talk to your friends that monthly, annually, they will commit to closing the funding gap so that you'll be able to take care of my daughter? Ghana now is at the point where the IMF funding alone is not enough. And the IMF knows that without substantial debt relief or fresh funding, the program, if it's approved, can only achieve limited effectiveness. And the IMF wants to avoid that embarrassment. So what it's telling us now is that because of the way we have messed up consistently over the years, it's harder now getting IMF program than a couple of years ago. Because in 2014, when Ghana applied for the IMF supported program, our debt, in fact, Ghana's debt was officially classified at high risk in 2014. Yeah. And we exited the 16th IMF program in April 2019 with debt unsustainability hanging on us. Instead of the NPP government doing something about it consistent with the advice of the IMF and the NPP government's own exit strategies, we didn't follow it. So what is happening now is that it's harder now getting a program. And if we continue like this, can you imagine the next time we have to apply for the 18th program? And of course, it's just a matter of time unless we do something drastic. You can imagine what we have to give up. It will go beyond domestic debt restructuring. Now, bear in mind that a botched domestic restructuring is only a recipe for another restructuring in the next 2 to 3 years. Kojo, let's not play around what we are talking about here. If you look at what depreciation alone, together with the domestic debt exchange, has done to the banking sector in the next 2 to 3 years, unless banks aggressively through capital planning, okay, recapitalize. Otherwise, there has to be a move from the central bank to recapitalize the banking sector, because they cannot play an important supportive financing role in our economic strategy. They cannot. Look at capital base of the banks now. It's so thin.
Prof, I'm told this is where we're going to have to leave it, but it's quite a big thought you've put on our minds there. The risk to the banking sector at the end of all of this. Professor Godfred Bokpin is a professor of finance at the University of Ghana. He's been our guest to talk about the suggestion that Ghana is simply becoming a colony again with this IMF program.